bringing you cannabis culture from a woman's point of view. And as always, here to elevate the cannabis industry. I'm one of your hosts, Ice Dawson, Cannabis Socialite.
And I am Dasheeda Dawson, the WeedHead.
Hi, sis.
Hey, sis. Hey, sis.
Hey, sis. On today's episode of She Blaze, we're keeping it short and cute for the new year. We're reviewing 5 of the hottest topics in 2020, and we're giving top cannabis predictions for 2021.
Okay, well, let's of course kick things off with the high of the week. And I have a very special high of the week. I love representing for our people. Cannahouse is a Black-owned cannabis ancillary business. Shout out to the CEO, Reggie Keith. And I just got my membership card. So it is a membership community. So basically they throw various events. Membership right now is free for a limited amount of time, and you can visit canna-house.com for more information, or canna_house. But very excited to kick off the year with my honorary membership. It's free events, very exclusive events, as well as membership discounts. That's why you need the card, depending on where you're trying to shop for your CBD or for your medical cannabis.
Yes, well, I got my membership card too. So shout out to Cannahouse, doing big things, definitely. My high of the week, I'm still riding high from New Year's. We had the Cannabiziac New Year's Eve countdown, and it was a virtual thing. So, everybody was up partying. They had podcasts from different time zones come in and do a power hour countdown to the new year in that zone. We did the East Coast because we are currently easting it out, but it was super, super fun because that means we went first. And I had basically a blazing hits 2020 countdown playlist. I was getting them real turned, y'all. I mean, the ratchet really came out. I'm a hostage.
It was a fun time. You did an amazing job hosting. I am just the sidekick, so I was happy to tag along, as the old head, but I appreciate you kicked it off just fine. And that's the way I feel like 2021 is about to be, just fine. So
yes. And you was giving them the real deal Holyfield for the theme for 2021, because you're a Black woman that can't tell you none. And when she told me, I didn't believe it, but here it is, and that's the theme.
Well, it is. All right. So we've got to get into these hot topics because we got a lot to cover, but a little bit of time because, like you said, we're just trying to kiki Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Right. And take ourselves right back to enjoying New Year's festivities. So thank you guys for joining us. Our first hot topic really is talking about all the hottest things that happened last year in 2020. And some of the big things we discussed was really the fact of the transitioning from in-person to online COVID. And so our first topic from last year we highlighted was LA's original cannabis cafe. Now, it was formerly known as Lowell Cafe, but we gave y'all the tea season 3 about why it's not called that anymore and all the crazy things they got going on. Mm-hmm. And being the first social cannabis club in Los Angeles and having that license was crazy because we know once COVID hit, had to close the doors.
Yeah, and they had to pivot, right? We talked a lot about having that wicked pivot step, which, of course, takes me back to my basketball years because that is a way that you get around something that is, basically preventing you from scoring. And my interest is seeing how well they pivot, right? There's a lot of big companies don't unfortunately have that great of leadership. And while I did enjoy their flower, some of the things that we reported on as it pertains to opening up this social consumption lounge certainly gave me a little bit of pause, and I definitely was giving them the side eye. But as you talk about, they pivoted to this delivery model, right? And to me, I'm like, is it a Chick-fil-A get you through all the way? I mean, one of the best, friendly, quick but long delivery lines, or is this something where you feel like you're going to be continuously tortured because you're sitting in your car? LA can be really tough. Cali can be really tough with that type of long lines and wait. So I'm curious about how well they did pivot.
I know that's right. Well, they are saying they are on the up and up. At the end of the day, they could not use their social cannabis license, their social club license. And so they had to create a whole new license lane for drive-throughs. And it can be long like anything in LA, but if it's in the heart of LA, a lot of people are still traveling, even though you shouldn't be. And so it's a good way to still social distance if you want some cannabis. So yeah, Lowell had to Lowell transitioned his name to the original Cannabis Cafe, you guys. And right when COVID hit, they had to close their doors. So they then created a whole new model of drive-throughs for picking up their cannabis in LA. And with that being said, I'm excited to see how else they will transition. But let's get into our second topic from 2020. So Thailand, we were so curious about Thailand because they have actually started giving people cannabis oil with THC in their hospitals and clinics. They are prescribing it like an actual medicine.
Well, because it is medicine and Thailand is up on it. And so shout out to them for actually having a clue, right? Because the United States is still trying to find one. Thailand has been challenging what I feel like is the status on cannabis as medicine. And when you take a country that for so many years within its jurisdiction has treated cannabis as basically the, Schedule 1, puts you into life imprisonment or potentially death for having it in your possession only, to now giving it out for free to hospital patients in a concentrated oil form, that we are in for an amazing 2021. But we've been reporting on Thailand's transformation since 2018. And so that's how far behind the United States is, in my opinion, in terms of really understanding what type of health justice and health equity we're missing out on, not actually acknowledging that this is a plant that should be descheduled at the very least, and certainly should be available and accessible to our most vulnerable communities.
Absolutely. And I think it's pretty dope because with it not being in its necessary smokable form, it's a lot easier to be accessible in a hospital. If you do have a traumatic injury and you are able to drip some cannabis into their mouths, it's probably a lot easier than trying to get them to smoke some cannabis in the moment.
Hell yeah. I mean, you got somebody, I'm just being honest, we're struggling with our own family challenges where cannabis is the best medicine. And to know that, in Arizona, for example, where you have a medical state, now an adult use state, but certainly a medical one where you can get a caregiver license, you can get a patient license, and you still have to fight within the hospital for getting people who, have a traumatic brain injury, that type of care. Thailand has better care.
Right.
Okay, America. That's about as exciting as the $600 stimulus check.
That check, you're right. But I definitely agree with David on the cannabis IV. I am there with you, but Thailand probably would get it a lot quicker than us if they're already giving their medicine in hospitals.
Yep.
So on to our third topic from last year that we really, really liked was, we didn't like it, but we felt like it was super important because the DOJ, so the Justice Department, gave access to the DEA to basically temporarily conduct undercover surveillance on George Floyd protesters. So that was a big, big deal last year because this was this huge movement for the culture, for people to start understanding the type of brutality people of color go through. And as a response, they asked the Drug Enforcement Administration to keep an eye on them, not the National Guard, not the local police, not even the state sheriffs. Y'all asked the Drug Enforcement Administration.
Yeah, I mean, I think here's what I would say. There's a GP answer and then there's the real talk answer. So I'll start with the GP answer because you're going to hear this and you want to make sure you have the ability to combat it. Most people will say, well, you have all these people, especially the folks that are really rioting, they're hopped up on something. So we know that these congregations of people are probably doing something. But the real talk answer is that this is a strategy that has been employed by the United States government in the past. During the Civil Rights Movement, Black Panther Party was interrupted largely due to the Drug Enforcement Agency because they utilized cannabis, as did many other groups that supported the Civil Rights Movement, including quote unquote hippies, right? This was a known thing, and Nixon has been known to say for the record that part of the Controlled Substances Act, which was shortly after, it's part of that regression period, right? Where some movement had been happening, but how do you disrupt it? You disrupt it by going after the thing that is a shared or common, denominator, and that was cannabis usage across the board. And they disrupted it using the Drug Enforcement Agency. That is what it was born to do. And so it doesn't surprise me that they would use the same tactic because it has worked in the past. They would love to say, oh, well, we're talking about meth and we're talking about other things because who else would be like, of course, damaging. But there were so many peaceful protests, way, way, way more than what was showcased as far as the crazy behavior. And I really don't think the crazy behavior was because of drug induced behavior. I think people are outraged because of the way that they've been treated forever and a day, literally. So that said, I'm glad that as a group we were able to put people on warning. To your point, it is an important topic for 2020 because as we go into 2021, our steam hasn't changed, our movement hasn't changed, and so those same groups will still be surveilled or under surveillance, if you ask me.
Yeah, but my question is, are they using the Drug Enforcement Administration to surveil, do undercover surveillance for the Proud Boys? Because they meet once a month in DC and somebody gets stabbed every time.
Listen, if they're looking for meth, they might want to check there. But to be honest, I don't know. I'll be real and say that one of the things we know to be true in this country, and we just have to call it out, is that the way in which we implement everything has a range from a tinge to quite a hell of a lot of systemic racism infused. And the way that the DEA's stats and historical data looks, it is like not just a tinge, it's quite a hell of a lot. So my expectation is that it is Black and brown people that are disproportionately being targeted. And when you look at the Black Lives Matter movement and that being part of this strategy, it wouldn't surprise me, that would be the approach.
Absolutely. Well, I am definitely very curious on how, as we talk about these inequalities, how the new administration will check it and make sure it's a little bit more balanced. Because again, they asked us to vote for them. We voted for them. So, run me my money and more than $600.
And not even just run me my money, it's like run me my generational wealth, son. Like,
put
in the legislation that makes sense for me to get more than a $600 stimulus or even be concerned about it. Run me my communities that you destroyed. All right. Like it's a list of things that go on. Run me the multiple generations that you incarcerated. Y'all got a lot to remedy.
Right. And so get started, act fast and do it right. So on to our fourth topic from last year that I just think is talking about money and making things go round. Last year, we found out Scott Miracle-Gro was the main financial supporter for New Jersey's legalization. Now, it's crazy because when people think of Scott Miracle-Gro, you think of potatoes, you think of, planting trees in the back, not cannabis trees, but like regular trees in the back of your yards and stuff. And what do they have to do with cannabis? Well, we soon found out that they actually are the leading owners of cannabis nutrients. They are the top producers. They own that company. They own that brand name. And so, cannabis relies a lot on Scott Miracle-Gro. So they put their money where their mouth is for many coalitions, not many of color, but still coalitions. And they have, passed the law. So I'm curious.
Well, listen, that doesn't surprise me at all. New Jersey actually has a lot of farmland too, if you will, and it's interesting to see how no one talks about it, but it doesn't surprise me, and I'm glad that we're reporting on it. This is an ancillary business, true and true. They only benefit from legalization. They only benefit for decriminalization, because it also means that the legacy market, which is growing regardless year over year, but the legacy market is also a customer. Scott Miracle-Gro, unlike say Weed Maps, and we've talked about it, when someone goes into a Target to buy the soil or whatever, they don't ask whether or not you're growing it for the legacy market or whether you're growing it for the legal market or just for yourself or whatever. The fact of the matter is that they're benefiting, and so they are putting their money where their mouth is. It's what they're supposed to do. I think what we need to pay attention to, though, is where in our communities are those type of synergies existing already too, and start to also try to align accordingly. We're too busy again putting a hand up to it and say, no, we don't want to be affiliated with it. In 2021, that is a dangerous proposition, because you're going to be left behind. And Scott Miracle-Gro's of the world, which is a family company in the sense of when they started, but is now a really large company, they are really putting in a lot of investment into the cannabis space.
Absolutely. And I am curious how many more big companies are going to pour in the donations to move legalization forward. So our last hottest topic from last year, we covered it like, I want to say we covered it for a month, and we had to talk about it. Cannabis companies and them receiving COVID assistance. Now, this is really important, because I feel like when it first happened and we started hearing about all the loans, all of the stimulus access and stuff like that, you broke it down for us to let us know, hey, like, most cannabis companies have multiple different companies that do stuff that don't touch the plant but help the company. If you are working within your own independent contracting, you can qualify. And so I had to talk about it, because they must have listened, because a lot of cannabis companies actually got their PPP loans.
Well, I'd like to say that some folks did listen, and we hope, we are adding value for our audience and followers here at She Blaze. But also, there are a lot of people who are just, got good teams where if you have an attorney or someone who is operations lead or administration lead for corporate companies, they'll be able to help you navigate, because the applications itself were not very difficult, right? Yeah. It really was whether or not you were going to give yourself an opportunity. Plus, there are a lot of people who are just risk averse. At the end of the day, your one job is to fill out the application to the truest of your extent. Your job is not to determine your own eligibility. And that was the number one mistake that a lot of people were making, especially Black and brown folks within the industry, especially the ancillary businesses and the hemp ones. And in fact, if you dug deeper into the SBA rules around PPP and EIDL, you start to see that they actually called out hemp as an exclusion. And so there were people who were literally just so shook that they were going to get in trouble for just applying. And I'm like, how, Sway? Like, at the end of the day, your job is not to assess yourself. You got to answer the questions to the best of your ability and answer as honestly as possible, for sure. And that is where you are, responsible for it. And then after that, it is on them to determine whether or not you're eligible. Point blank, period.
Absolutely. And I definitely think that was a huge miss. And I know what you said, if they have a good attorney, but as we look at the different P&Ls of these big old cannabis companies, yeah, they probably was listening in, okay? Because they don't know what they're doing sometimes.
That listen, being able to manage a P&L and have an attorney to say advise you, two different things. But you're right. Some people winded up not making smart decisions. So we reported on how many people got PPPs, and there are some of these publicly traded companies like Akerna. Whether they get to keep the PPP or whether they decided to do so, it still remains to be seen. We just got the number on what they were approved for, but it is unclear whether or not they decided to take it, because that's when the liability, which can be both civil and criminal liability against the government, that's where it comes into play. And so, yeah, I'm really interested in 2021 and finding out what had happened with these loans and whether or not people actually took them.
Yes, and I think you're right. I am curious. So I wonder what 2021 shall bring us, you guys. And with that being said, let's get into our second hot topic, because we know that a lot of states have legalized cannabis through their ballots, and now we're actually about to see what it looks like in law. So officially January 1st, 2021, some states are allowed to consume cannabis. Montana, we know they passed with their voters ballot. Arizona, they passed with their voters ballot, and New Jersey, they passed with their voters ballot.
Yeah, small round of applause when you were able to not just consume, but just possess it without having any worry, especially if you're 21 and over. Now, that doesn't mean that you're able to buy it still, right?
Yes.
And so there's that. In some of these places, Arizona and Montana, there is a home grow component. And so if you're in Arizona, you can absolutely go and get your seeds and start getting ready to plant. Although where would you get seeds is still a little bit questionable. So there's still some grayness to this, and until the legislation starts to really be put in place. But I'm excited because there's it's changing lives. At the end of the day, it hopefully will lead to a lot less unwanted police interaction, brutality, incarceration, and things that lead a domino effect that ultimately destroy the individual, the family in which they come from, and the communities that surround it. So that's what that does. And in Montana, it is 10 times more likely that it's a Black person that is arrested as compared to a white person for cannabis possession. So we're talking about very, very important racial disparities that go away simply because that is just not a tactic anymore from our police bureaus.
Or not supposed to be a tactic, right? Because some of these places, I am curious how Montana has so few people of color, but yet all of them is getting locked up. So I'm still trying to figure out that equation. I don't know the formula for that. I don't know how that added up like that. It's like I'm confused. So hopefully they get it together. Also, Montana and Arizona have a home grow component. So even though, yes, there's not a market put in place, they can have plants at home. So yeah, I mean, getting seeds is curious, but we all know if you could grow it at home, you don't need a market.
This is true and not true, right? I think at the end of the day, we don't want to feed into any scare tactics that people have against home grow because, let's be real, not everybody got a green thumb. Although what I've learned is that during this time with COVID, I don't ever want to be without medicine. So best believe that I started making my own CBD oil from hemp. I started doing those things. And the next thing for me is I got to learn how to grow it. So there's going to be some interest among people, but whether people are really going to be able to deliver against that, whether they will have the space to do so among the rules out of the way, right? Because it has to be a covered thing in Arizona. Who's to say? So I still think a market is really important because we still, at the end of the day, as human beings, crave convenience. And at the end of the day, growing it yourself is it often can be only convenient for, say, a patient who is like, listen, this market does not have the cultivars that I need, and I'm gonna go ahead and make sure there's a convenient way for me to get my medicine.
I absolutely agree. They need a home grow component and an actual real market component. But what I'm not a proponent of is them basically rushing legislation and forgetting about everything. So yeah, I would rather be able to have maybe a community family member who has property enough, grow it, Allow us to have it while these lawmakers educate themselves and learn about it. Because honestly, New Jersey doesn't have a home grow portion. And I'm looking at the law and I'm telling you, these lawmakers are not actually making some sense, so.
I cannot find the lie in that. I detect no lies. At the end of the day, New Jersey is not having a home grow. So guess what's happening in their market? It's in the legacy market. So people go still keep on growing, keep on buying and selling because the legacy market exists there already. It doesn't appear overnight just because now that ta-da, we have it legal. That's part of the reason why we want to legalize it. That's part of, there is a market that exists and most of those people are consumers as it would be in the legal market. And so where those consumers going to shop and feel more comfortable, it's still going to be one that is technically illegal. And so, yeah, I if I'm in New Jersey, I'm not all the way like, wind beneath my wings around the legalization. Right. I'm still a little bit concerned, but I think we have to continue to watch what they do. They do have enabling legislation, and now we just have to, is the governor going to sign it? Is it something that's going to be enacted?
Right. And how soon as there is enacted can you work on it? Okay, well, with that being said, now I'm really itching to get into these cannabis predictions for 2021 because we got some tips, some tricks, and just darn outright shade. So let's get into our main topic, which is honestly this industry. What is happening? Like all these states have legalized. I mean, New Jersey legalized before New York. Some people would have never bet their money on that.
I would have. I mean, their governor ran on a platform for legalization. So when Governor Murphy became the new governor in 2018, we already knew that. Meanwhile, the governor of New York was still calling it a gateway drug and convening health committees to discuss the benefit of cannabis. So when your leader for your state starts so behind, it doesn't surprised me that we'd get to the finish line a little bit faster with New Jersey. Now, that being said, we still had to fight for a lot to happen in New Jersey so that it wouldn't muck up the things that are happening with the Start Smart Coalition in New York, which is really rallying around a bill that has been around a long time. So yes, when we talk about what's really going to be the talk of the town 2021, we have to talk about New York legalization because it's the third try technically.
Right.
And it's the bigger market.
Well, let's not get into it too quickly because federal government is trying to make some deschedule and some moves along its way. I mean, at the end of this day, the administration is changing. We have a major runoff here in Atlanta with the different senators, John Ossoff and Reverend Warnock. So, at the end of the day, I just feel like there's some things that are happening federally that even if other states don't move yet, it's worth watching.
For sure. You're right. Let's not forget the importance of the federal landscape. This year, the end of the year, and I'm glad we stayed on air to report about it, but like in December, so many things happened that were historic and vote, but certainly undercover as far as the people knowing about it. Mm-hmm. Most people understood what was happening or knew about the MORE Act. That got the most fame about it because it's branded around opportunity, reinvestment, and expungement. But of course, it fell short because language slipped in the final hours that didn't make sense and actually removed the opportunity from the communities that needed the most, and did not handle expungement in the most efficient way, considering that both state and federal laws have impacted people's lives. So, but to see that there's research abound and the House and the Senate are agreeing on certain aspects around cannabis as medicine, I'm inclined to believe that we will see some movement, but we just got to make sure it's movement in the way we want it. Government does not have to rush to legalize at this point. So I'm not a proponent of it, and you won't see me cheering for legalization because they don't know what equity-centered means yet. We still got to teach them that.
I mean, they don't really know a lot. All we asking y'all is please just deschedule, decriminalize, and mind your business and learn some business, learn some education on the cannabis because they are definitely backtracking what a lot of states have put years and years into implementing when they do stuff like this, when they create their own language around something they're just they don't know anything about. And that's my biggest thing with the federal government. They love putting bans and regulations on things you don't even know shit about it.
That's fact. I mean, because it comes from an enforcement perspective, enforcement and prohibition perspective. And that's what makes this new administration something to watch, because you have two people, one who's completely reformed as far as I'm concerned in the way she talks about the industry. And that's the Madam VP-elect Kamala Harris, who started off her career as an attorney, working as an attorney general for the state and arresting and ruining a lot of lives as it pertains to cannabis. And then started to turn that around as the first black female senator for California. And some of the precedent that we see in other states is because of her due. She has been willing to meet within the cannabis industry among the thought leaders to say, hey, how do we figure this out? But I think that we have the challenge of Biden, who comes from a very prohibition, 3 strikes you're out, enforcement environment as far as cannabis is concerned. And he still was, even on the campaign trail, referencing crazy things around cannabis that made it very difficult for me to vote for his ass. Excuse my language, but it was. I definitely was not riding with Biden.
You were sweating in the clear.
I literally was. I was definitely not riding with Biden. It was something that I could not proudly say and still give him a side eye. So we're watching very closely to see what the administration does, because there's not still enough competency within their leadership, and they're also talking about social justice, but not doing so with cannabis justice in the conversation. So it just tells me that there's still a long way to go.
Absolutely. And I'm waiting, biting at my nails to try to figure out who this attorney general is, because we got some questions, we got some requests, and we got some things that need to happen. And the FDA guy too. So because we like FDA, you got so many cannabis lawsuits, I don't even know, like, pick a number, it's like, what is going on here? And so, yes, federal government is something we must watch. And some of the other stories we're watching in 2021 is cannabis education. I think you said it best. Cannabis competency, how does that happen? Like, how do they get cannabis competent and create laws that help us?
Well, right now we are behind, but the fastest way is to utilize the people who are willing to help and educate. And so I think that's part of the reason why I'm so proud to be a founding member of the Cannabis Regulators of Color Coalition, because it is a group that are leading architects for policy reform and cannabis equity. And so, yeah, we can go back, and we're government officials, so we can go and say, hey, we've been in your position of implementation, we've been in the position of policy making, and here are the ways, the best practices that we've found, and here are some of the things that we still have yet to pilot. But also being daring enough to say, I don't know what I don't know, and I'm curious enough about cannabis that I want to learn more. And so I'm very excited about some of the projects that we're working on that we cannot reveal yet, but we'll have some really, really big reveals, because education is going to be the key. I've been talking about education for a while, but that's why I wrote a book, right? And then, it is now blown up during COVID times because everybody had to pivot, and that was something people felt like they could pivot to. Of course, not all education is created equally, and I'm putting my side eye up on that one for real, because you don't want to be a person who is a spreader, and I don't mean a spreader of COVID, but a spreader of bro science and untreated information as it pertains to cannabis. So yeah, no, cannabis education is a huge trend. We'll be watching. We'll see the big influencers like Green Flower Media continue to offer bigger and better experiences, but what will Black and brown people do to better educate their communities? That's more what I'm asking myself at this point.
Okay, definitely, because if you keep it in some of these churches, you are not going to learn about no cannabis, honey, and you need to. And cannabis is medicine first and always. And I am excited to see some of the things that will blossom as far as cannabis education. I'm also excited for celebrities in cannabis. No lie. I mean, I'm a Bravo-holic. I love me some reality shows. We've seen a few of the housewives dibble and dabble. So now I'm like, okay, well, where's the Cannabis Housewives? Hello.
I know, right? What's up, Andy? No, neither one of us are housewives, but they've always had the little single. I'm more like I feel like Bethany Frankel, where I came on. I'm not attached to anyone necessarily, but growing a business. But no, I would rather just not be on those type of reality shows. In my opinion, I'd love to see more real canna celebrities, people who are on the ground doing the work, and we're showcasing it on the A&Es, the CNNs of the world. I mean, as much as I love Dr. Sanjay Gupta, he is not the only doctor, as you know, that's doing this work every day. And I would pay absolutely to watch the schedule for the doctor's knocks and how frequently they are talking and how they are changing not just America but the world's perspective on cannabis as medicine and how they approach endocannabinology. Like, that's absolutely a necessary thing. But then there are just some things that we're doing also on the regulation side. I'm looking at us and I'm like, dang, City of Portland needs to be watched, because we about to do some things, and we've already done quite a bit in the first 8 months that I've had in role, and I'm excited about what this next year brings. So, like, as things happen when we know it's historical, yes, it needs to be televised, and that's the type of stuff I'm looking to see. But happy always to see when cannabis celebrities, the real, more celebrities, like not really cannabis, but they're actually celebrities, they get involved and they do the right thing. And so, like, there was a BET documentary Nas did, and there was at least some, on the ground, mention of the people that are doing the, thought leadership in the industry, like Wanda James. And then same thing with Fab Five Freddy. We've seen people put out good content to show the stories and the struggles and the triumphs, but I'm kind of over the rappers deciding they want to be the front man for the cannabis industry at this point.
Hey, I'm not over it if they asses want to come and advocate on the steps with us. Like, come out here with it. Hello, like, come on, you come to the streets with me. If you want to come to the streets with me and rock out and see how to really advocate and help me with the actual work too, don't just come up as talent. Like, I'm here for
it. That's a good point. You're right. I think part of the reason why I have fatigue is because that does not happen. And so that's the part, you're right, where if we can call them to the table and say, hey, there is real justice advocacy happening. You are not reinventing the wheel. You are not the first. We talked about that in 2020, corrected some folks on the first. And so join the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, eighth, ninth, even 10th individual, and amplify those people's works. That's when you're really using your celebrity.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely feel like I agree with that. I mean, Killer Mike had just said something about, like, Joe Biden should adopt Bernie Sanders' thoughts around cannabis and legalization, decriminalization, things like that. And I'm like, okay, cool, thanks, Killer Mike. But like, what coalition you with again? Like, I'm just asking. I'm like, you a member of what organization? So we do need you guys to not just give us some airway time, but we need you guys to actually help us with some work. And especially because I think Georgia will be legalizing probably in the next 5 years, personally, for me, with how things are going, especially along the East Coast. Because once the Northeast moves, everybody else is going to move too.
Well, you're right. So does that mean we get to talk about New York legalization? Or
yes, we do.
Because that is really, to me, something we have to watch. I mean, I know, I'm partial, obviously, because I'm from Brooklyn. And so I understand. Listen, why you laugh like that?
We know you're from Brooklyn. We know.
Dramatic pause. I'm from Brooklyn.
Let that set in.
Let that settle. But no, New York is also arrested more people than any other state in the country. New York's disproportionate arrest rate for Black and Hispanic men particularly is insane. So New York, of all the jurisdictions, really needs to get it right. And if I'm the federal government and I haven't figured it out, legalization yet, what model will I figure out what to do with? New York, it would be one of probably the bigger comps to look at because it's so large. New York also has a reported nearly $4 billion a year legacy market, supposed to be the largest in the world. So yeah, everybody needs to be watching what's happening with New York legalization, but it is the third time that we've heard the governor say, hey, he's trying to put this in budget. When it's in budget, it does mean that it's going to be hidden, right? It's just part of a global story. And if it get passed like that, then it's going to be legalized through his plans, right? Mm-hmm. But then if it doesn't pass within the budget, which has happened in the last couple of years, they have to introduce legislation. And like I said earlier, and I kind of alluded to, there's been the MRTA, which is legislation that's been around for a while, that is sponsored by Senator Liz Krueger and Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes, been around for 5 years. They've been holding on to that bill and improving it every year with the help of the Start Smart Coalition. Shout out to Melissa Moore of DPA and Cassandra Federico, who really laid down the groundwork for what it means to hold the line. Because New York would have been legalized if it was up to the governor, but he didn't have the cannabis equity piece in it. His CRTA copies everything except that. And so that's always very interesting when you see a state that can legalize, create a lot of revenue, but will not necessarily outwardly say from the beginning there's going to be equity from day one. And that's what the challenge will be. People staying on top of this game in New York. Legalization cannot happen unless there's going to be equity from day one, point blank, period.
Period, Pooh. And with that note, let's talk about, some cannabis equity and maybe even cannabis tax revenue. I know that's been a big thing that we've been looking at these last couple of years, but like now we're really getting into the weeds of things.
You're right. No, in 2021, I predict people will be a lot more focused on it because, of course, of COVID. Everyone is trying to make sure that the revenue actually is meaningful. And we've had record years in Oregon, Arizona, Maryland, where it was declared a essential business. We've seen that tax revenue be really important for the states and the local jurisdictions. However, it's important for people to demand, an accountability of the cannabis tax revenue. What's actually happening? Because when we dug into the city of Portland, despite the fact that a ballot measure in 2016 allocated that cannabis tax revenue into its own fund and meant to support small businesses and communities that cannabis prohibition has devastated, that wasn't really happening by and large. 80% was going to public safety, which was inclusive of the police bureau. So you have to ask yourself, when you are legalizing, if your state's legalizing or already legalized, what they've been doing with the cannabis tax revenue. And so in 2021, really dissecting that, making sure that there's a return on equity investment out of that cannabis tax revenue, and that fund is used to support equity designated applicants, but also the communities at large, reinvestment and rebuilding, and making sure that folks have the ability to enter the market. The tax revenue is not only meant to benefit the state, and don't be fooled by, we're going to run it like the general fund, because guess what? We found out this year that the police bureaus still are getting anywhere from 60 to 85% of the general fund. And so, no, cannabis tax revenue should not be going to police bureaus at all. It's like a slap in the face.
Right. I definitely think people need to check their mayors, check their different local town commissioners, because they're the ones that's asking, all these big budgets for the police. Why y'all even need that? And most of y'all arrests come from harassing people for cannabis. So, how is this even real? So we do need to stay on top of that and on top of all the tax revenue, but especially cannabis tax revenue. The cannabis tax revenue should not go to police officers. As far as I'm concerned, that's like paying your slave owner.
This is facts. And I mean, here's the last thing I will say. Any place that it is usually in law, like in the New Jersey one, it was in the Oregon or in the city of Portland as well. It's usually the case it's supposed to be used for some sort of retraining and re-education. So hold their feet to the fire and make sure that there is some sort of retraining. The dogs need to be retrained as well. And so the budget should be utilized on getting them some real detective skills, on how they're going to weed out, no pun intended, apprehended the real criminals, because they've been criminalizing consumers and they can't do it anymore. And they more or less been criminalizing Black and brown consumers at that. So it's important for us to make sure that folks are getting really using the money for re-education until the law is changed or the policy reflects what it should be. And then I have to just give a shout out to the Oregon Cannabis Equity Act, which is a new act that will be introduced this session. I'm so excited. It's a lot of the work that I've been doing in Oregon. And shout out to Jeanette Ward Horton and Dr. Rachel Knox and so many people within the Equity Coalition within the state of Oregon. But we have something called an equity board or oversight board. And that is really key too, because what we found is they may write it into the law and that looks cute and whatnot. But if people aren't watching or there's an oversight, guess what? It does not get implemented as desired. And so unless we have those things in place within the policy, we see that we're still not getting the return on equity investment that we'd like to see.
Say word. Well, 2021, we all about our money, honey. Okay. And I'm so excited. I'm so glad to be in a new year. 2020 wasn't bad, but 2021 is gonna be pretty just fine, like you said. And just the last thing, we want people to stay ahead of the game for cannabis.
Absolutely.
And some of the best ways is to become cannabis competent.
For sure. But you know what? Really also recognize that the products, the industry itself is diversifying very, very quickly. You can start where you are coming from. And I talk a lot about the 4 C's of cannabis success. And the first one is like, what are you currently doing? Right. And that's so important. So cross over your skills. I think the best way people can stay on top of it, and I'm gonna be real, if you hit me in my DMs, the first question you're going to get asked, especially if you signing up for a Calendly appointment, is, have you gotten my book, How to Succeed in the Cannabis Industry? Because if you haven't at least had that as a baseline, we're going to have a struggle of a conversation, and you don't want struggle conversations, certainly not with me, because I'll let you know right away. Listen,
you can't tell her none. You can't tell her not a dang thing.
I mean,
not about this cannabis thing.
No, it would be like, no, let's not waste your time. Let's definitely not waste mine. But no, I'm excited. There's a lot of interest, and there should be. So many people are recognizing the importance of cannabis, first from a social justice perspective, but a health justice perspective. And with COVID, really never, ever really waning, right? It's gaining steam, and we're still seeing Black and brown disproportionately dying. We've got to do all that we can to not miss the boat on this opportunity. And that means educating yourself. Get the book, How to Succeed in the Cannabis Industry, is available on Amazon, Target.com, BarnesandNobles.com, but you can also get the ebook exclusively on my website, theweedhead.com/shop. It was a great year. We didn't do the book tour as expected in 2020, but we still got to be an Amazon bestseller in 3 categories. And I'm just excited about the growth of the book. And I actually look through it once every 3 months myself, simply because it's a helpful book to help you analyze your strategy on, like, how are you going to be impactful in this industry? How are you not going to have a dummy mission? How are you not going to waste your time? You need to write it out. You need to work through it. And you need to understand the vast concept that cannabis is.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. Grab that book, you guys. Get on your task, talk to your lawmakers, and get some cannabis education. Thank you guys for joining us. We look forward to connecting with you guys too, whether it's virtually, because it's still kind of COVID-y, or in person when it's accessible. Anyway, let the people know where they can find you. Since they all hit your DMs, it kind of sounds like they know where to find you, but just let them know.
Because I'm Googleable now, honey. Yes. So you can find me at my first and last name at Dasheeda Dawson on IG and Twitter. And of course, I'm the WeedHead, and I'm always with my company, my sisters in cannabis. You can find us at theweedhead.com always as well.
Yes, ma'am. And make sure you guys follow She Blaze on IG, she_Blaze. And, come join us again next Saturday. We will still be here at noon, you guys, Eastern Standard Time. And if you just want to binge us, because we're so dope and we talk about so many things, please listen to us anytime on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube, WeTube, everywhere. So have a great, great weekend, a great holiday. Happy New Year's, and see you later. See you next week, sis.
Yes, sis, and welcome to the new year, Queen.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, Queen.
Bye.
Bye.